Hello, everyone. Welcome to CultureTalk, where we share insights and learnings from leaders in arts and culture. Today, we're exploring the environmental impact of our digital world with Gareth Edwards, Chief Client Officer at GoCodeGreen, a company helping organizations measure and reduce their technology carbon footprint. Hi, Gareth. Thanks for joining us today. Can you tell us a bit about your journey into digital sustainability and what led you to joining GoCodeGreen?
Sure, and nice to see you again, Matt. I suppose, a lot of people who are working in sustainability wouldn't always do so. It's obviously quite a new arena, particularly in the technology space, where it's quite an emerging industry. I've spent 25 plus years working in digital and marketing. I'm primarily in financial services earlier on in my career, but latterly I was a consultant for one of the big four, working across culture and sport as well. And I think probably, again, like a lot of people, COVID and the pandemic had quite an impact on my outlook. And I kind of spent a little bit of time reflecting on who I wanted to be and what I wanted to be doing with my life. And I think as these things do, I was fortunate to meet the founders of GoCodeGreen through that period. And after lots of kind of conversations, took the plunge into joining GoCodeGreen about 2 years ago now. And I think that my head had already been in the sustainability space, and from a broader perspective, as running large digital transformation projects, again for one of the big four. I was very aware of the impact of travel. For example, I had projects with many people traveling every week from different locations to come and support clients, which didn't seem like the best long-term answer. And that was a big part of my journey within that organization, was how can we deliver more sustainably. So it flowed quite naturally as I kind of moved into the tech sustainability space. My head was already there. I was looking for something with a bit more purpose. And most of our clients come from that kind of big enterprise financial services space as well. So it's been quite a natural fit.
Yeah. And obviously, sustainability and kind of environmental impact is a very broad topic. It encompasses all parts of life, but what we're specifically focusing on today is digital and technology. And many people might be surprised to learn that digital technology generates 3 times more carbon emissions than flying. And this is one of the many great stats we'll be referencing today that have been referenced by GoCodeGreen. Could you explain why digital technology has such a significant carbon footprint?
Um, well, electricity is the simplest answer, and technology's use of it. And I think that if we have to just kind of look back at our history, really, and there's a reason that technology has accelerated past the emissions of flying and done so quite quickly. It's because we just haven't considered sustainability as being a need in that space, where industries like aviation have had for a long time pressure from external to be more focused on sustainability, and consumer pressure to consider their travel, and enterprise pressure to consider your travel, and much more focus on train travel and others. The reality is aviation's been pretty focused on sustainability for quite some time, because they like money. And I think that if you were to take a journey back in time to what a plane travel experience was like in the 80s, it's very different to what it is now. We all travel with a little bit less luggage. The seats are all a little bit thinner. There's a few more people on the plane than there used to be, and the planes themselves are more dynamic. The fuel's better, so they've been incrementally looking at all the different areas that make them more efficient. Turnarounds are shorter. Like, all of those things reduce the carbon impact of air travel. We haven't applied that mindset in technology. Technology has solved lots of problems for us, and has done so very, very quickly. But for the longest time, we've not applied that same thinking to our approach to technology. It's, let's build the best thing not the best and the most sustainable thing. And really what we're trying to do now is bring that focus back on sustainability or back on efficiency within the technology space, whether that's saving carbon or saving money. And as you said, there's all kinds of great stats to demonstrate the impact of technology, whether it's the embedded carbon in your smartphone, the impact of things like streaming, both music streaming and TV streaming, for example, or just the digitization of society. Every interaction we take now has some kind of digital interaction. And whilst each one has a small impact, we do it more and more and more every single day. So things like just our social media usage, for example, often say to the kids, if you want a domestic flight, Edinburgh to London or London Paris, take 8 to 10 days off TikTok, because that's the same energy usage as a single flight. So there's all kinds of stats which tend to shock people, and we use them largely to do that because people have just not considered the impact of technology on the planet, and we're keen that people at least raise their awareness of it, because every one of us can individually do something to reduce their impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're real eye openers when you share stats like that. And obviously, efficiency is, I think, the central theme to sustainability and environmental impact. And I think we often assume that digital technology is inherently efficient compared to more analog technologies. And maybe in some cases that is the case. But as you say, there are big gains to be made. And yet another kind of stat we're sharing is that you've mentioned before that ICT accounts for nearly 6% of global emissions, and obviously that is set to grow, especially with kind of Bitcoin mining and AI technology coming in, which are contributing to that massively. But what are the other kind of main contributors to this kind of rising emissions of ICT, and why is it growing so rapidly?
It's like that kind of classic ski jump kind of curve, rapid adoption. Even 10 years ago, smartphones really weren't ubiquitous, and now everyone has one. And I think there's a couple of factors at play here. Of course, things like that it's very easy to point at things like Bitcoin and the technology that's based on the blockchain, and say that's the amount of energy used in both mining and in data centers is a big contributing factor. And I think data centers account for sort of 3 to 4% of the world's electricity bill already, and that's growing really, really quickly. And in fact, I'd have to go and double check my stat, but I believe that Mark Zuckerberg has recently said that when AI hits mass adoption, that we'll need 8 times more electricity than we're currently producing in the world. That's an enormous raise, an increase in electricity, and we're already struggling to generate enough green electricity. So for me here in Scotland, it's very easy to tap into sustainable energy. It's much harder in other parts of the world. I think if you look at Texas, for example, and I think 8% of their energy comes from renewables. In California, it's something like 80% of their emissions come from renewables. So across the world, we've got this really diverse spread of where our electricity comes from, and there's just not enough of it to support this growth. In our world, when we're working with technology, we're all exposed to generative AI conversations on a daily basis. Generative AI uses an enormous amount of electricity, an enormous amount of water as well, another scarce resource, unless you live in Scotland. But that's not really being considered, and I think I've shared with you previously just one conversation with a ChatGPT or a Claude or one of the other large language models. Will utilize like I think half a litre of water just in that one conversation just to cool the servers. So the rise isn't to do with one thing. It's lots of incremental things. Everyone having smartphones, everyone having hundreds of applications. The increased use of data. You look at the amount of data that both government and large enterprise are now keeping, with the view that they will use it at some point. All of that data is being stored, and there's an electricity bill for that every single year. And it's not like we're getting rid of any of it. We're just storing and storing and storing and storing. And I think little things like having a moment to cleanse your digital estate as an individual are some of the things that people need to consider. And I think we've all probably got, if you travel for work, you've probably got 1,000 receipt pictures on your phone. You've probably got 1,000 screenshots of things that you might want to buy 3 years ago. And when we talk about environmental impact from technology, it's important to consider when we measure it, we're measuring its annual impact. So if you have a large email, which might account for 20 grams of carbon, and you keep it for 10 years, that's 200 grams of carbon that has, accounted for over the lifetime of that email. So it's all of that. It's this kind of growth and build up. We're not deleting stuff. We're using it more. All of those are all factored into the growing impact.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure all of us have so much kind of like unused kind of data and kind of digital resource hanging around. I think, as you mentioned, email inboxes are the classic. Like, how many emails do we just store in our inbox, just sat there holding no value whatsoever, but just because we don't clean it, really.
And I think email is a great example. I'm old enough now to remember when email became a thing at work, and we had a 5 meg email box, and then we had a 25 meg email box, and we had to manage our email within those boundaries. That was a constraint that we managed every day, and we managed, right? We got by. And we were forced to use other tools to share large files so that we could do our jobs. So working in marketing and advertising and all those other areas, we were sharing large files, and there was ways of doing that. Now there's almost an unconstrained environment for managing email, and we manage it because we want to feel more organized, not because we need to delete emails to maintain being able to get an email. So I think there are some of those things that are those constraints we used to work with, which were there for a specific reason. Storage was expensive back in the day, and that perhaps some of those tools might be helpful today in helping us manage what we're doing.
Yeah, and certainly we'll be going into more detail about kind of what we should be doing to manage kind of our digital cleanliness and all that kind of stuff in a bit. But I just wanted to go on to talk about streaming briefly. We might upset a few Olivier Rodrigo fans here, but her single driver's license has been streamed over 2 billion times on Spotify. And according to a source from The Spectator, the carbon impact of those streams is equivalent to 4,000 flights from London to New York. And obviously, like we're talking about with the other technology, I don't think anyone is seriously suggesting we turn off the music, but how can cultural organizations balance digital engagement with environmental responsibility?
So I mean, I think you used your the statistic from Libby Rodrigo there, and I think there's another example which you talk about a lot, which is the Taylor Swift example, where she was obviously flying all over the US and over the world, and famously generated, I think, 8,500 tons of CO2 from her flying. But her back catalogue on Spotify generated 800,000 tons of emissions from streaming. So, clearly, as you said, no one is looking to say stop streaming. Is that, in fact, this is one of the areas of digital sustainability which is becoming mainstream. Rolling Stone is writing about this recently, and I think their headline was "Save the Planet, Stop Streaming Songs." I think, and there's all kinds of arguments in there, which is largely we probably all have about 500 to 1,000 songs that we actually listen to, so why not just keep them on your phone? It's lower impact to have them on your phone than to stream them, and that this is all about making choices. It's all about being aware of the impact of something. If you stream the same song 4 times, download it. It's those, and this whole space is about being aware that something has an impact, being aware that there are choices that you can make, and having enough information or enough data to make the right choice. And I think what we're positing is that, and if you look at any statistics about comparisons between sustainable products and non-sustainable products, or ones that you can't certify as sustainable, products that are sustainable are grow 2.7 times faster than ones that aren't. So consumers and businesses given a choice between two things of similar value will choose the sustainable one. And in the technology space, we've not been great at saying, here's a sustainable choice. And in the cultural space, again, it's like, how do we make sure we're making the right choice? Digitization is often the right route, but have you considered all the other impacts of digitization? What are you losing by moving to digitization? What could you be gaining by moving to digitization? Is it a like for like? Is the experience like for like? And that's kind of some of the stuff they want people to think about as they take this kind of step down the digitization route. I think I've often used the example of things like tickets, for example, and I did previously did some work with one of the big global rugby tournaments, which was unfortunately impacted by the pandemic. But they were looking very heavily at going digital ticket only. And as part of that experience design process, we did a whole bunch of design research with fans. And unsurprisingly, and I'd already guessed this, but unsurprisingly, for a lot of fans going to see their country in a global final, that physical ticket had huge value. It's a memory token. It's something that they would look back on fondly, even if it's sitting in a drawer for 10 years. Or, as in some cases, we probably all got friends who've got ticket stubs in a frame somewhere of concerts they've been to. Don't jump to digital tickets just because you think it's better for the planet, because you're removing paper. You're losing other things. So there's debate to be had, I think, about what the best experience is and how you move people from one channel, if you like, to another channel.
Yeah. You previously talked about generative AI and large language models, which are one of the technologies that are becoming increasingly central to arts organizations, and of course, contributing to the ever-increasing carbon footprint from technology. But what should venues consider when adopting new technologies such as AI?
It's kind of going back to what I was saying earlier. Like there are tools that have a lower impact, and there's already starting to appear, tables of which has the most impact in terms of electricity usage or water usage. So do your research. There's obviously, and I don't want this to become a really technical thing, but there's obviously differences between large language models, and they all are better for one thing or another. But there's also small language models which might be more suited to a particular arts or culture sector. For example, if you're going to go down that Gen AI route, don't assume that AI is the answer to your problem. I think we're all making the leap towards that. And actually, in my experience, small to medium-sized organizations haven't done automation yet, haven't in some cases done brilliant digital basics yet. And actually getting all that right first is still the right thing to do. And I'm trying to leap 2 steps forward by using AI isn't necessarily going to get you the gains that you might think it would. Because the organizations that are furthest ahead in AI are the ones that already had great data. They had great, CRM data. They had great data about their customers. They was already organized. They'd already automated processes. And I think that it's very difficult for smaller organizations to be as ready as that. The use and management of some of those AIs poses not just cost risk, but reputational risk as well. And it's very difficult these days to ignore some of the cases that are starting to appear about misuse of AI, or people not understanding the impact of AI, or people using the outcome or the results coming from conversational AI without checking or without doing their due diligence. And sometimes actually, is it quicker? So within the sort of digital and advertising space, there's a lot of use of generative AI beyond the point of creative. So, to bring it into this space, imagine you're doing a new billboard ad for a new show, and that's being led by, a great creative director at a great agency, and you're going to do 18 different versions of that. Creative director leads the process, designs the billboard, everyone likes it, and then AI does the different sizes and different versions of that, and that accelerates that process. That's a perfectly great use case. What's not a great use case is, well, I know that you can, if you write the right prompt, you can generate, that poster without the creative director, and the creative director is expensive because he's got 20 years experience. And I've, and without getting into naming names, I've seen case studies where businesses have tried to take that back in house, given that task to a junior marketing person or an analyst within the team, and it's taken them 100 times more prompts to get to an acceptable outcome, because it's not just being a creative director, it's also being great at interacting with the tool, understanding how to write prompts, and understanding what good looks like. All of those things need to be in place in order to get the right answer. And actually, it takes a human eye to understand what great is. And it does take that experience, it does take all those years of experience realistically to be able to generate great creative outcomes. So it's not always the shortcut people think it is. And if you imagine the environmental impact of those 100 prompts, that's 50 litres of water. It's, the electricity from that usage. And of course, it's probably quite a small bill for that organisation. But as they're all looking at net zero, they're all looking at lowering their environmental impact, it doesn't feel necessarily like the right answer for some of these smaller arts and culture organisations.
It's interesting how the themes cut across a similar chat I had with Oliver Mantel at the Audience Agency about data the other month, and around going back to basics, going back to foundations, and making that kind of foundational infrastructure really efficient before looking into more emerging technologies. It's interesting, similar themes coming across there. The other piece of interesting work that GoCodeGreen does is with around Scope 3, which encompasses indirect greenhouse gas emissions in a company's supply chain. With cultural organizations relying on many third-party platforms, including ticketing systems, event management tools, CRMs, website platforms, how can organizations hold their suppliers accountable to ensure their Scope 3 emissions are as low as possible?
So I think, obviously, I don't know if we need to cover what Scope 1 and 2 are before we get into Scope 3. I don't know if that's useful, but Scope 1 is your fuel in your company vehicles or the logs on your fire. Scope 2 tends to be your electricity bill, so heating the buildings or that kind of thing. Scope 3 is everything else. And depending on the type of organization, your percentage Scope 3, Scope 3 can account for up to 90% of your overall emissions. So it's a huge proportion. And today, until recently, it's not really been a requirement to report Scope 3, but more and more, that more and more focus on Scope 3. And there's reasons for that are back to that kind of point about efficiency. So you are spending money with suppliers, and you could spend that more efficiently and more effectively and lower your emissions at the same time. And I think some of the bigger SaaS tools that you've talked about, whether it be ticketing systems, CRMs, content management systems, etc., they're being asked the question now by their bigger clients: what's your Scope 3 impact? They don't necessarily all have an answer, but I think from my perspective, asking the question is the great place to start. And I think that is how you start to hold people accountable. We care about what our emissions are, and therefore, whether it's on some kind of Scope 3 audit, and there's lots of great businesses out there that do those kind of Scope 3 audit and help you manage that process of really understanding your Scope 3 emissions. is a really sensible exercise, but that can be quite intensive. But even just taking small steps, so each time you've got a new procurement exercise, let's make sure we're asking the question. We're starting to measure our scope 3 impact. And we'd like to understand what your scope 3 impact on us will be. That's the correct place to start. Like really just asking the question, and looking at the suppliers that you're most reliant on. So whether that's based on spend or whether that's based on time spent, there'll be 2 or 3 of those suppliers who you spend the most amount of time with, or that spend the most money with, and having very front foot positive conversation with them, saying we care about our impact, we care about sustainability, you're one of our biggest suppliers. How can you help us start to measure the scope 3 emissions from the tools that you provide to us is the best place to start. If they don't have the right answers for you, or if they don't play ball, that's probably a sign that you might want to look elsewhere. And of course, in that space, there's lots of different providers. So that then becomes a way of holding people accountable. You're then able to make a choice. You might have a smaller provider who's far more willing to have a conversation about measurement scope 3 than a larger provider, or you might have 2 very similar products and one's happy to have that conversation and one is more reticent. But it becomes a guide. What kind of organization do you want to be? If reducing your impact is important to you, if reducing the impact of scope 3 is important to you, go play with organizations who feel the same.
Yeah. And obviously, changing tools does have an impact for businesses. It is a cost to businesses to change tools, but obviously once changes happen, and once people realize, oh, people are moving away from our platform because our scope 3 emissions aren't up to standard, that's when that change can begin to happen. That's when businesses start to make
and none of this happens quickly. We are in a new space, but we have to recognize that this legislation is coming down the line, which will effectively mean we all will have to do this anyway. So getting your house in order sooner rather than later is going to put you at an advantage anyway. And you want to be with suppliers who are already their heads already in that space. So whether there's an interim cost to changing suppliers or changing platforms, you should reap that back, whether that's in measurement and understanding, you're able to report that, or the efficiencies gained by working for an organization that's understands its own impact and is therefore able to start to reduce that impact too.
Yeah. So GoCodeGreen has helped to remove over 15,000 tons of carbon dioxide emissions from software. What are some success stories you can share about organizations reducing their digital carbon footprint?
So I'm talking about it won't be the most, it's not a cultural example, it's probably, but we work with a lot of organizations in government, a lot of organizations in the financial services sector. And one of our earliest clients has been on a bit of a journey with us. We've done 3 kind of measurement interventions with them in the last 3 years. And they've, I think I would have to double check the statistics, but they've reduced their impact since they started by, I think, 54%. It's about in and about that. And have still now got another 20% of emissions they can take out as they've been along the way. And I think that they're a great example for us because it wasn't just one thing. So we measure software in the same way that you might measure the impact of a laptop, a car, or any other physical product. We understand the costs to build it in the first place, costs to improve it, and the cost to run it. The cost to build it in the first place, you can't do a huge amount about that, but it's really important to know if for the next time you build something like that, how you might improve it. But that most of the emissions come from that kind of update process. So the interventions that we made with that particular client were very much a combination of moving them from quite an old-fashioned infrastructure on premises to a cloud infrastructure. That it was encouraged by us, but it's a journey they were taking anyway. But we were able to predict the impact of moving to cloud would have been for them, but also training. So humans still have a huge impact on the impact of software and technology. They make engineering choices, they make coding choices, and they have an ongoing impact, particularly in new releases. So they, and in this case, they're releasing new code to this platform sort of 20 times a year. So every release has an impact. And if you can ensure that sustainability is kind of baked into that process, both in terms of the code, but both in terms of the approach of the people, you can reduce that impact. So there was some big technical levers we deployed, but also training and awareness, like actually just baking awareness into that process meant that they were considering the impact of their code as they were writing it. And I think that's, the easiest way for us to kind of translate that into a kind of cultural space, which tends to be much more front end, if you look, is the simple kind of, we've got some free guides on our website about, checklists of stuff that you can do, but things like video in today's modern digital experiences tends to autoplay, tend to just go land on a website and suddenly there's an immersive video experience. And we used to have great statistics about how people engage with video, but because it autoplays now, we understand that less. And actually, you've taken the choice away from a consumer about whether to play or not. And actually, that has a carbon impact as well. So the more people who don't play that video, the lower the impact of that page. But also there's a choice about resolution, there's a choice about color, so there's lots of different individual design choices which all can lower impact. And probably somewhere in the middle there is an ideal, which is here's a great experience where we really understand what the customer and the consumer wants out of that digital experience, which is lower impact, but still gets them what they need. And I think we've gone down a very experiential digital experience route. And actually, I think consumers in a lot of ways want something a little bit more pared back. They want to get somewhere quickly, and sometimes we get in the way of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are another thing we often talk about in the business is there are accessibility concerns with autoplay videos and interactive media like that as well. So yeah, there's definitely impacts to choices like that.
And I think there's a big crossover between accessibility and sustainability in terms of how we might deploy that, and learning some lessons from how accessibility was deployed earlier on, and it's now obviously baked in, and all the systems we use tend to consider that, and we probably need to follow the same path to embed sustainability into a lot of these tools that we use to deliver digital experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. There's often a perception that sustainability comes at the cost of growth or user experience, as we just kind of touched on. How does sustainable technology actually create opportunities for organizations?
I think, well, I'd probably argue that the point that there are a whole ton of things in the technology space and sustainability that really just take cost out. So that's just profit. So if you're very focused on profit, it's very easy to find savings, and therefore in this space that allow without impacting customer experience in any way. I think the main area for me is that I think I touched on it earlier. The customers have choice, and they tend, when given a choice that is side by side comparable, they'll tend to take a sustainable one. So, whether if your green electricity was the same price as your normal electricity, you take the green electricity. I don't know anyone who wouldn't take the green route if it was the same price. And I think there's been this perception about things like that, them being more expensive. It becomes a human choice rather than a sensible choice. Why does everyone not have electric cars? Well, A, there's a new car, and B, expensive, and C, there's lots of other reasons, and there's good arguments to have about whether they are more sustainable or not. but we want to be able to present something like for like, and actually there are a lot of things that you can do as organizations which make you sustainable, whether it's or make you more responsible. So things like B Corp, for example, you're not just looking at sustainability, you're looking at all of ESG and all of being a responsible business. B Corps do well because people respect what they're doing, and B Corps more expensive than other businesses? Shouldn't be. So I don't see it as it shouldn't be a cost to business. It's about doing things differently, not doing more things. Embedding that into your culture, embedding that into the way you do things. We talk about it from a product development perspective. There's kind of the three main drivers when you're doing product design: so desirability, feasibility, viability. Adding sustainability at that stage earlier on as an additional tension, an additional lens on our product development process, it just means the end outcome might be slightly different. It's not just going to be sustainable, it's still going to be viable, it's still going to be feasible. You just tweaking it a little bit to be a bit more sustainable, and that shouldn't cost anymore. And it should end in an outcome that's more sustainable. And I think we go back to that statistic before, which is that 2.7 times growth for sustainable businesses. If you're sustainable, your product, your whatever opportunity you might be selling should be more appealing to consumers. So that to me is the opportunity. In a world where we already know we've missed our global warming targets being missed left, right, and centre, people care, particularly the younger audience, and there's all kinds of great statistics about how people will act on their conscience in the workplace. I think 1 in 5 millennials would quit their job if the organisation they work for isn't being as sustainable as they promised to be. So there's an opportunity cost as well of not doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and as we mentioned before, sustainability and efficiency often go hand in hand. And if you're efficient, then that's obviously going to be a saving on either cost or energy or time, and that's obviously a benefit to any organization if you can be more efficient.
Absolutely.
So digital technology's energy consumption is projected to reach 20% by 2030. So if there's one thing you wish cultural organizations would understand about their digital footprint and what they should do about it, what would it be?
It's probably going to be data, and even I think 15 years ago when I was working in banking, we were capturing every minutiae of data, and I think we were using at that point 0.3% of the data we were capturing. We've tended to take the approach of capture everything and then work at what we'll do with it later. And as I think I said at the start, there's a cost every year. So that data you captured 10 years ago has had 10 years worth of electricity to maintain that data, to keep it up there. So really considering your data strategy, what do you really need to know about your patrons and your customers? What's the minimal viable data, if you like, to take product terms? What's the minimum you need? And build it up rather than capturing everything and going backwards. That's probably the main thing. But also, don't just assume that digital is always the answer in this space. As I think I said, there's so much more experientially that matters here, and it's very easy to hark back to some of the stuff I was doing in the financial services space. If it's just people, and I was part of teams that were driving towards 90 to 97% usage of online banking, and it didn't take long for you to go in and pull some people off the street who had security concerns, had accessibility concerns, just liked walking to the bank because it got them out of the house. There's a whole bunch of other reasons that people weren't moving to digital banking that wasn't because of the product. And it's even more so in that kind of cultural space. People interact with you differently and in different ways for different reasons. And digital's not always going to be the answer. And I was doing some advisory work for a theatre who had gone very much down the route of trying to do YouTube shows and had invested in all the technology to broadcast their shows online, and it hadn't hit, and then they were actually charging fees for watching online. So it wasn't the experience that people were expecting, wasn't the experience people wanted. The digital opportunity for them, as it turns out, was the behind the scenes. So they've now grown a TikTok account and an Instagram account of all the behind the scenes stuff. What's it like, to create scenery? What's it like? The whole machinations of putting on great theatre. People are really interested in the making. They're really interested in how it all works. They're, how all the cables work and all of the kind of stuff that goes on in the background. That's fascinating. What goes in dressing rooms, like cook changes, like demystifying some of that, and that content has landed, and that actually was so much cheaper for them to produce because they've moved from being, doing something which was trying to do a professional broadcast type experience to doing something was, staff's on iPhones and Android devices, and being able to chop and edit it in things like CapCut. So you can get far more out of what we would call almost guerrilla type activity, just the fun stuff at very low cost, which will have a much more resonating long-term experience with people. That has a much lower impact. You're not lighting it or just using smaller on devices, and will connect with audiences in different ways. So just taking a sort of broader view of how digital can support your organization, and really understanding that digital is not always the answer, and having a proper triage process, I suppose, to understand some of your choices. What would be the downside of moving to a digital experience, as well as the upside?
Yeah, very much a kind of mindset thing as well, to kind of think about this stuff more consciously. Well, thanks for your insights today, Gareth. It's been really interesting here, and obviously, we've mainly just touched on digital technology emissions today, and obviously for cultural organisations, there's a whole bunch of other environmental impact from their productions as well. But for those interested in learning more about and measuring and reducing their digital carbon footprint, what's the best way to connect with GoCodeGreen?
Just visit the website. You can go to just GoCodeGreen. We've also got a learning platform, which is learning.gocode.green, and they can learn a bit more about it there. But for me, the best thing you can do is just, as I said, have an awareness that it has an impact. Do your own research. There's lots of tools out there that are starting to rank the performance of some of the tools you might be using, and ask difficult questions of your suppliers.
Great. Yeah, we recommend everyone to take a look at the GoCodeGreen website. I think everyone could benefit from making their systems more efficient. That's going to have environmental impact as well as business impact. But yeah, we're big fans of your work, so we'll always keep an eye out on what you're up to and any kind of reports coming out from your end. But until next time, thanks again for your time, and have a great week.
Thanks, Matt.
Cheers. Thank you.